Few people today have not heard of some element of Greek mythology, whether it be the Trojan War, which lasted 10 years, the famous Trojan Horse, which finally won the war for the Greeks through deception, the tales of Oedipus, the tragic King of Thebes, or Heracles, the great warrior demi-god. So central are these myths to Western society that certain words which we use today are derived directly from them. A kind of computer virus is referred to as a Trojan horse. Narcissism is a term for excessive self-regard based on the story of Narcissus in Greek myth, a hunter who was known for his looks and who became so transfixed by his own reflection in a lake that he spent the rest of his life looking at it. There are many other modern references to Greek myth, a system of stories and fables which the Greeks used to understand the period between when the gods had first emerged and their own time, an era of which they had a loose historical knowledge and onto which they transplanted an array of beliefs and rather fantastical stories. The sources. We are lucky to have a number of ancient sources which shed extensive light on these myths. The most famous are surely Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, two parts of what was most likely originally an 8-part epic cycle covering the entirety of the Trojan War, of which 6 parts are unfortunately now lost beyond fleeting references to them here and there. The Iliad focuses on a 10-day period towards the end of the war and the actions of the Greek hero Achilles, while the Odyssey takes place after the fall of Troy and covers the many years of adversity as Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, attempts to return home. These are not the only sources which we can draw on concerning Greek myth. Perhaps the most valuable accounts are provided by Apollodorus, a Greco-Roman author writing around the 1st century CE who produced a library of Greek myth, something of an ancient encyclopedia on the topic. These, and a great many other works, provide us with our knowledge of Greek mythology. The Trojan Cycle. While there are hundreds of different stories associated with Greek mythology, there are certain ones which were infinitely more significant for the Greeks. None was as central to the whole edifice of Greek mythology as the Trojan War, or what is often known as the Trojan Cycle, to encapsulate the full story of the war, many elements of which concerned the plight of individuals after they left Troy. The war was initiated by the Achaeans of mainland Greece after Prince Paris of Troy absconded from Greece with Helen, the wife of King Menelaus of Sparta. The war effort was led by Menelaus's brother, King Agamemnon of Mycenae, while King Priam was the ruler of Troy. However, the two great warriors of the war were Achilles on the Greek side and Hector, the son of King Priam, on the Trojan side, though other formidable warriors such as Ajax and the cunning Odysseus feature too. The Trojan War is a classic example of how history and myth collided in the Greek imagination. The fables of the Trojan War were based on some elements of actual history from the late Bronze Age world of about 1500 BCE, a time when Mycenae was the most powerful of the city-states on the Greek mainland, and Troy appears to have been a powerful state on the western coast of Turkey. Yet clearly the mythology around the war, which features tales of divine intervention and a fantastical ending with a giant wooden horse, were not based on actual historical events. Rather, the Trojan Cycle was based on a period of time which the Greeks knew little about, but which they nevertheless knew constituted part of their very early history, and onto which they superimposed mythological stories. The most significant of these were Homer's works, written perhaps in the 9th or 8th centuries, but most likely based on long-standing stories which were transmitted orally in Greece prior to being written down. We all know how the story went. Achilles slays Hector during the war after Hector kills Achilles' lover, Patroclus. The war only comes to an end after 10 years when Odysseus devises the idea of building a giant wooden horse inside which the Greeks will hide their best warriors. They then leave the horse on the beachhead near Troy, claiming they are leaving for home and that the statue is an offering to the gods. The Trojans take the horse inside the city, following which the Greek warriors emerge and open the city-states into which the Greeks stream, destroying Troy. Jason and the Argonauts. Arguably the second most significant story within Greek mythology was that of Jason and the Argonauts. This is one of the few Greek myths for which we have a full epic edition, the Argonautica, written by Apollonius of Rhodes in the 3rd century BCE. It tells the tale of Jason, the son of Aeson, the rightful king of Iolcos, who has been usurped from his throne by King Pelias. Pelias sends Jason on a quest to retrieve the legendary Golden Fleece, fearing that Jason will try to claim his throne if he does not find a way to get rid of him. Jason sets out with a band of warriors from Greek mythology, including Heracles and Theseus, the latter being the legendary founder of Athens. They set sail in a ship called the Argo, for which reason the band of heroes came to be known as the Argonauts. During the expedition, the band go through many trials and tribulations, notably sailing through the Symplegades, two giant rocks in the ocean that continuously smash together and threaten to destroy any ship which sails through them. Jason also battles the Harpies, half-human, half-bird monsters, before retrieving the Golden Fleece and returning to Iolcos with it, but the tale ends tragically as Jason ends up betraying Medea, a sorceress whom he meets, falls in love with, and marries during the quest. Oedipus. Another tale of considerable fame is that of Oedipus, a son of King Laius and Queen Jocasta of Thebes, who is left abandoned on a mountain on the orders of his father, who receives a prophecy that Oedipus will kill him one day. However, the servant of the king charged with leaving Oedipus out to die does not do so, and instead entrusts the child to a shepherd from the city of Corinth. Oedipus grows up and is adopted by the royal family of Corinth, but when he too hears a prophecy that he will one day kill his father, he decides to leave Corinth. His travels bring him to Thebes, where he famously enters the city after solving the riddle of the Sphinx, leading the monstrous beast to commit suicide. Along the way, he meets with his actual father, King Laius, whom he kills in fulfillment of the prophecy made years earlier. After he enters Thebes, Oedipus is made the new king there in reward for having rid the city of the Sphinx. He then marries Jocasta, unaware that she is his own mother. Years go by, and they have children together before an oracle reveals the truth to Oedipus and his family. When this occurs, Jocasta kills herself, while Oedipus, in horror at the turn of affairs, blinds himself. He then leaves Thebes and is guided in his blindness by his daughter Antigone to Colonus, where he dies. The various elements of this Oedipus epic were related in a wide number of sources, with mention in Homer as well as poems by the poets Hesiod and Pindar. Atlantis. Often Greek myth could be constructed during the classical era of Greek history. This was the case with the myth of Atlantis, which story does not actually belong to the corpus of ancient Greek myths, which would have been widely known about by the ancient Greeks. Instead, it was effectively a myth that was invented by the 4th century BCE Athenian philosopher Plato. Plato wrote about Atlantis in two of his more well-known dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias. The story was of an advanced civilization that had built a sophisticated city at the center of a great island, which was entered through a series of canals which led out to the ocean beyond. The city was deemed to be more developed than anything in the world in Plato's day, but it had all been destroyed as a result of a great natural disaster. The myth of Atlantis emphasizes the manner in which old stories could be repackaged as myths, as the basis for Atlantis was quite possibly the destruction of the Minoan civilization on the island of Crete during a vast earthquake about a millennium before Plato's time and around the same time that the Trojan War might have occurred. What was the purpose of Greek mythology? While Atlantis was not a common staple of Greek mythology, the purposes to which Plato put the story of Atlantis were: in effectively creating the myth of a fantastical lost civilization of immense power, Plato was attempting to counsel his readers about the ideal society and how even utopias could come crashing down. This was similar to how Greek mythology functioned in the ancient Greek world in general. The many stories and fables which the Greeks told were used as philosophical statements and parables about the fragility of human existence and the folly of men and women. The Iliad is, for instance, a meditation to some extent on the inevitability of death. The stories around the life of Oedipus pose the question as to whether or not something is immoral if an individual is not a conscious agent in their own immorality. The story of Jason and the Argonauts is a classic tale of betrayal and vengeance, but also one that supposes that one needs to have respect for the gods in order to achieve redemption. Accordingly, Greek mythology was not just a corpus of stories and legends, but part of a wider intellectual and sociological system through which the Greeks understood their place in the world and the vagaries of existence. Greek mythology in Greek art and culture. That this mythology was so central to Greek life is evident from its place in the art and culture of classical Greece. That is the major period of the flowering of the Greek city-states in the 6th and 5th centuries BCE. Throughout this period, we see Greek mythology arising everywhere in Greek society. A huge part of the Greek economy during this time was the sale of wine and olive oil across the Mediterranean. These products were transported around the known world in large amphora and other vases. The Greeks decorated these vessels elaborately, painting them in black and gold and red colors, and these paintings more often than not were depictions of scenes from Greek mythology. There is no shortage of scenes from the Trojan War or of Jason's quest across these. Indeed, one anonymous vase painter is even known as the Achilles painter. Such was the number of scenes which he painted on Greek red and black figure vases depicting the hero of the Trojan War. The fact that such scenes could be painted on these vases without any captions or words to describe what they depicted is highly interesting. It indicates that the painters expected the viewer to know what they were looking at. Such was the centrality of mythology to the lives of the Greeks. And this same principle applied to a wide array of other cultural endeavors. For instance, the three most prominent tragic playwrights of the classical era, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, based the majority of their plays on stories from Greek mythology. Sophocles, for instance, wrote a trio of plays on the tale of Oedipus, typically referred to as the Theban plays. Hence, Greek mythology was not just an aspect of Greek literature, it was central to the lives of the Greeks. The afterlife of Greek mythology. The myths of the Greeks had a long afterlife. They were central to the Romans' understanding of their world, and they tried to find their own place within them. For instance, Virgil, who became the quasi-national poet of Rome in the 1st century BCE, composed the Aeneid, an epic poem in the vein of Homer, with the aim of establishing that the Romans were descended from the Trojans, claiming that Romulus and Remus, who according to Rome's own mythology founded their city in 753 BCE, were descended from Aeneas, a prince of Troy, to whom Priam had given the sword of Troy when the city fell. This preoccupation with Greek myth has continued across the centuries. There is no shortage of paintings which were produced in Italy during the Renaissance, which depict scenes from Greek mythology. Motifs from Greek mythology abound in some of Shakespeare's plays, while in the 19th century, philologists such as Friedrich Nietzsche and psychoanalysts like Sigmund Freud used Greek mythology in their own writings. More recently, the tales of Jason and the Argonauts and the Trojan War have been given the Hollywood screen treatment with varying degrees of success. Evidently, the Greek myths are as popular today as they were 2.5 millennia ago.